Good evening. It's Reverend Mark Hughes. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and you've reached Juxtaposition. We're here again with you tonight. Got a great lineup for you tonight. Some updates on some national news, and we're going to also bring you back home here. Let's begin with the truth. The Voting Rights Act, it was not a gift of American generosity. It was not just handed down to black folks like, hey, hey guys, here, take this. This is for you. Black people actually fought for these laws. So some of us, we kind of take it a little personal when folks start taking stuff back. People bled for these laws. Churches were bombed for these laws. We know that people lost their jobs for these laws. People were beaten, jailed, terrorized, murdered. So because this country spent literally generations making sure that black people could technically be citizens while remaining politically powerless. That's the truth. That's the truth. That's the truth about American history. So in 1965, after Selma and the Civil Rights Movement forced the nation to confront itself, the Voting Rights Act, it actually became law. See, but that wasn't how it ended. See, one of the most important protections was something called, this thing called pre-clearance. I don't know whether you remember that or not. Pre-clearance, yeah, pre-clearance. It sounds like a good idea. It sounds a little technical, but it's pretty simple. Here's how it went. States, they have this long history. Believe this, believe it or not, I don't know, go imagine. Many states have a long history of racial discrimination. Go figure. So they could simply just change their voting laws whenever they wanted to, basically. They could change their voting laws. But they needed to get approval first. This was the whole pre-clearance thing. Just, you got to get approval. They had to prove that the changes would not, get this, harm black folks. Yeah, that's what pre-clearance was all about. Why, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's because America, we had already shown repeatedly over and over and over again that when black political participation increases, certain political systems, they start changing the rules. They start changing the rules. That's not just a theory. That's actually documented history. They keep moving the goalposts. So when you start to think about this thing, I want to take you back to Shelby versus Holder. Okay, Shelby versus Holder. Okay, so there's this in 2013, the Supreme Court, it weakened one of the most central enforcement mechanisms of the Voting Rights Act. This is this Shelby versus Holder. See, this is what the court argued. Check this out. Is that they said, well, you know what, America, we've changed a lot. It's like over all of these years, we've become a post-racial nation. We're not like that anymore. So it's not necessary that we have these laws. But black communities, we heard something different because black people, we understand that something that this country actually keeps forgetting about, and that is progress does not equal protection. Just because racism gets quieter, it doesn't mean that it actually disappears. Yeah. And almost immediately after the courts weakened the laws, states began implementing really, really restrictive voting measures. You remember, it's just over these last several years that this has happened, where all of a sudden, like 24 states implemented probably like over 94 laws across the United States, making voting more difficult. Closing polling places, district line shifts, voting procedure changes. They just narrowed the access. Every time communities challenged these actions, the standards became harder and harder and harder. Harder to prove discrimination, harder to challenge their unfair systems, harder to win. And now what we have now is Louisiana versus Calais. So you probably remember Louisiana versus Calais. Oh, I forgot my Shelby slide. Show me Shelby slide. I worked hard on that slide, so I don't want folks to miss it. Calais, Louisiana versus Calais. Again, moving the yard post. This case matters because what it does is it actually reveals the deeper direction this court may be heading. Now here it is, and this is plain language version I'm going to run down to you right now. I'm going to read a little bit to you. It says Louisiana has a long history of racial discrimination in voting and also redistricting. Black people make up nearly a third of Louisiana, that population. But for years, congressional maps limited black voters to meaningful influence in only one congressional district. Civil rights advocates challenged those maps under the Voting Rights Act, and after years and years of litigation, watch this, the courts determined that black voting strength was likely being unfairly diluted. So the court case was settled in Louisiana. Now, pause there just for a minute, because you know it's coming. So now, the phrase when you say dilution, that really matters when we say it was being diluted, because modern voter suppression always looks like fire hoses and police dogs, and but it's that's what everybody usually imagines in their head. But sometimes it looks like maps and lines on maps, and sometimes it looks like bureaucracy. Sometimes it looks like technical adjustments. See, vote dilution means black voting power gets spread out strategically. So what happens is when you spread the vote out, black communities, they can't effectively translate population into political representation. See, that's modern voter suppression. That's what AI does. That's a technology thing. So the courts ordered Louisiana to create another majority black congressional district. So, and after extensive review on testimony, evidence, litigation, the second district was created that alone should have been the remedy. That should have been the correction. But what happened was that's not how it ended. I want to talk about a little bit about affirmative actions before we go on. I want to talk about voting rights. I want to talk about every time we got black advancement, every time black advancement becomes effective, a new conversation suddenly begins out of whether protections themselves are actually unfair. That's why black communities are paying close attention right now, because we understand something very, very deeply, and that is that rights without enforcement, they're merely suggestions, and voting rights do not disappear all at once. They erode administratively. One polling place here, one district there, one voter purge here, a procedural hurdle there. They disappear quietly, technically, incrementally. And eventually the entire communities lose meaningful political power while everybody pretends democracy is functioning normally. So that's what's going on in this whole voter suppression thing, this voter rights. Now, let me be clear about this voter rights thing. The reason why I wanted to talk about it tonight, because it just happened on the 29th of April, is because of this. Now, here it is we know that after Reconstruction, there was huge progress because of a multiracial democracy was formed as a result of a fusion movement. What happened with the formerly enslaved and poor white people, thank God, got together for the first time in history and made monumental progress in a democracy of the United States. But there was an immediate backlash, and by the time we got to 1896, then came Plessy versus Ferguson, the whole separate but equal Supreme Court decision once again. Before that, the only Supreme Court decision that was probably worse than that was probably Dred Scott, and that was essentially when the Supreme Court decided, and this is, I believe it was 1857, check me on that, the Supreme Court decided that black people had no rights that any white person was obligated to respect. In other words, they could do anything that they wanted to do. So those are two of the most horrible Supreme Court decisions that have ever been made in the United States until April 29th, 2026. Why do I say that? Because it was the completion of the decimation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, I know I look good, but here's the thing, I'm 63 years old. So I was 2 years old when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 happened, and my birth certificate says Negro on it. What I'm trying to tell you is that democracy is very, very young. But get this, democracy, how it was built, it came from the blood, sweat, and tears of civil rights. Let me say that one more time. It came from the blood, sweat, and tears of civil rights. And it was the legacy of slavery that made civil rights necessary. That's where that fusion movement came together. It would take until 1954, after democracy fell after the turn of the century, from 1896, especially 1898 with the riots in Wilmington. But after the turn of the century, that demise of democracy would take us another 54 years to pull up to the time that the civil rights movement actually started. So once that started, we know that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Housing Rights of 1968 are three of the key components that really brought us back online and put us on a trajectory of a true democracy. Very young, very fragile, if we can keep it. What's the most important component of that? Voting. The most important component of a democracy is the ability for everybody to be able to vote. And that is what was taken. And that's why many would argue, many scholars have proven that that's what makes us less of a democracy today and more of an autocracy as a result of what happened. Tragic what the Supreme Court did. Now, let me say it clearly. This is not about Louisiana. Louisiana is the example. The larger question is whether the federal government, and particularly the courts, still see protecting black political participation as a serious democratic responsibility. That's the larger issue, because when voting rights weaken, everything downstream becomes vulnerable. Housing, education, healthcare, economic policy, criminal justice, environmental justice, political representation, it shapes all of it. If you don't have voting power, then you don't have political representation. If you have no political representation, then you do not live in a democracy. And that's why this moment requires vigilance. That's why this moment requires vigilance, not panic, but vigilance, not despair, but vigilance, because freedom has never sustained itself automatically. In this country, it has never sustained itself automatically. Never. Now, while federal civil rights protections continue growing less certain, I guess there's something a little bit more positive that we can talk about here in Vermont now, because we've got some things going on here. I want to talk a little bit about equal protection ain't optional. It ain't optional. So what we got going on here is today in the Vermont House, the House of Representatives, they moved proposal for the Equal Protection Amendment. And from a black perspective, this matters. This matters because constitutions matter. Constitutions matter. Courts matter. Language matters. And protections matter. So I don't know why, out of the 150 people in the House of Representatives in the state of Vermont, that 10% of them, roughly, 14 of our elected representatives voted against this, but we're not going to reflect on the negative aspects of it. I just want you to know, and I want you to remember as we're having these conversations, that as we continue to fight for freedom, there's a reason why we have to fight. And sometimes, even though folks are in the majority, they have a tendency to become very, very noisy, and they're very influential. But just to know, this is not that quintessential happy land where everybody is in agreement about what democracy looks like in Vermont. So we just need to get over that. Proposal 4, it would explicitly guarantee equal protection under Vermont's Constitution, regardless of a person's race, their ethnicity, their religion, their disability, their sex, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their gender expression, or their national origin. That's it. That's what what the constitutional amendment is proposing is that everybody would have equal protection under the law. Now, some people hear language like this, and the first thing they think is, why, well, shouldn't that already be obvious? You know, I talk to so many wise guys, and I see so many people on social media, well, isn't it obvious? Well, that's easy to say, when you started off on third base and you making certain assumptions about certain people whose demographics you do not represent and whose experience you have no idea about. So, no, it's not obvious. And if it were obvious, we would have never required civil rights for anybody in the United States of America. Let's be clear. This democracy was not built based upon fairness. That's the reason why civil rights were required. The answer is that history tells us otherwise, because rights that are assumed, if you're assuming, oh, isn't it, don't we have those rights? Those rights, the rights that are assumed, but if they're not clearly protected, they become vulnerable during political instability. And I'd say that today we got a little political instability going on right now. You know what I mean? So right now, this is a politically unstable moment. So, I don't know, I forget the guy's name. It's some kind of shenanigan. It was like a fable. This guy goes to sleep and he wakes up after 25 years. You know who I'm talking about. Okay, let's stop having those moments, okay? This is a political unstable moment. So right now we need to raise to this moment. Proposal 4 also says something else that's extremely important too. And that is that it says efforts intended to create equality of opportunity for historically marginalized groups remain permissible. That's what it says. And that matters enormously because all across the country, we're watching organized attacks on diversity initiatives, on equity programs, on affirmative action, on race-conscious remedies designed to address historic inequities. Yeah, that's what we're seeing. Most of us are getting kind of quiet about it. We are maybe changing our websites, perhaps adjusting our grant language. Don't look at me crazy. But that's what's going on. But because all across the country, we're seeing all these organized attacks. So work like this is important. It doesn't necessarily change what's happening on the federal level, but it does double down on our commitment in this state to protect marginalized communities. Underneath many of these attacks, what you need to understand, lie this old lie, wearing modern clothes, basically. The lie says this is the lie, is if you acknowledge racial inequality, then somehow you are the problem. If you're gonna bring up racial inequality, then you're the problem. It's kind of like the old, and it's so predictable. It's like, oh, guy walks in the room, says something racist. You look at him, you say, look, don't say things racist. He's like, what? What'd I do? You say, you just said something racist. He said, I didn't say anything racist. He says, yes, you did. Well, actually, it's not me who's racist. It's you who's racist because you're bringing up something, you're telling me that I said something racist, and come on. Stop it. So black folks, we know better than that. Okay, you can't repair inequity while pretending that inequality never existed. And that's the lie that folks are trying to tell today, is they're trying to tell us that somehow or another that we come from a nation where inequities never existed. Come on. I mean, we already figured that out. That's nonsense. We already figured that out. You can't unlearn that. We can't unknow that as a nation. We remember George Floyd, remember all that stuff. So we got to keep it moving. Now, let's be honest about Vermont. Yeah, let's be honest about Vermont. Vermont often sees itself as a very progressive state. Fair enough. Very progressive, very progressive. And in many ways, we are progressive. I've been here 17 years. This is the progressive state. But racial disparities, they still are here, and they remain real. I mean, have we forgot the housing numbers? Where black folks in Vermont own housing at about 21%, which is half the national average. And that black folks own farmland in Vermont at 0.002% of the 1.2 million acres of farmland. Maybe 1,200 are owned by black folks. And I could go on and on. Only 13 houses in Burlington belong to black people. Come on. So let's stop pretending that there wasn't systems and policies that created this. Education, healthcare, policing. Don't get me started on policing. Incarceration. 11% of the prisons are black folks in Vermont still. I mean, if we're going to believe the nonsense that they're trying to sell us, then maybe we should just go ahead and say, well, maybe somehow inherently black people are just not that clever. Maybe inherently black people somehow or another, it could be that they're just very unfortunate. Perhaps they're just having lemony snicket moments. Maybe somehow or another, they just have a higher propensity to crime. Maybe they just use drugs much more than white folks. Come on. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and go back to what we started and not forget that this whole discussion started by us acknowledging that this nation was built on inequities, and we have to do something about it. So this amendment is not a declaration that Vermont has solved racism, okay? Vermont has not solved racism. It's not the finish line. It's a framework. It's just a framework, a constitutional tool that committees can use when they're moving forward. Okay, and increasingly, communities, they may need stronger local protections because federal protections are becoming less dependable. So that's the simple reality. That's all we're trying to do here. So the future civil rights struggles, they may not only involve schools and voting booths. They may involve algorithms. They may involve artificial intelligence. They may involve automated systems. They may involve data-driven discrimination, institutional decision-making hidden behind technology, which means equal protection must be durable enough to survive the future, not merely describe the past. That's why this moment matters. That's why this moment matters. So check this out. As we're heading out, I just want to remind you of the Raise Up Justice campaign. Raise Up Justice, holla at your boy. This is a fusion movement. It's rooted in civil rights and equal protection, human rights and nonviolence, a beloved community. This is a multiracial, intergenerational, interfaith, multi-abled, politically independent movement. The 21st of May at the Richard Kemp Center at 6 p.m. Lottie Dottie, everybody get out there, come on down, let's do this thing. The Raise Up Justice campaign is on the 21st, and that's every third Thursday moving forward. And let me say something clearly tonight. This is the real deal. So what we're doing is we're building this movement to address the civil rights retrenchment, the upending and the weaponization of civil rights at a federal level. What we know is when we stop getting protected at the federal level, we need to double down on the state level. So some of that's going to involve what do we do in our community, mutual aid. How do we continue to teach the legacy of slavery to our children and in our communities? So definitely we want to make sure everybody's coming out. Justice work cannot survive on outrage alone. Justice work cannot survive on outrage alone. Movements require organization. They require meetings, political education, coalitions, faith communities, young people, elders, strategy, discipline, and sustained participation. That's how change happens. Not occasional anger, sustained organizing, and emerging conversations around things like Shield Vermont, which is something else that we're going to be focusing on, and that's going to be something that we're going to be doing to drive the campaign to get out the vote for PR4. You got to think seriously about this because we're going to the ballot. Because an unsustainable democracy is not a democracy at all. Pretending otherwise, that's not going to help us. So the struggle for equal protection, it didn't end with Selma, and it's not going to end with this Voting Rights Act either. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This has been Juxtaposition, issues affecting black folks affecting change. Good night.
My people with me, together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it